Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's subject is a Joe Cool request, and Joe wanted me to review a webcomic called Skadi, or Skadi. Apparently it could be either one. Anyway, Skadi ran intermittently from 2008 to 2016, and it's primarily the creation of Katie Rice, with contributions from Luke Cormican. About the author. Katie Rice is an illustrator and animator who, during her career, has created a number of webcomics, including both Skadi and Camp We Don't Wantcha. And I say during her career because what she actually does for a living is create and revise storyboards and design characters. Apparently she's moved up to storyboard director in recent years, and these days she's working for Warner Brothers on the Animaniacs revival. She's also got some other project for WB in the works, but from what I could find, it hasn't been announced yet. Sadly, Rice is not a very famous creator, at least not yet, and so that was all I was able to find about her. So, let's move on. The review. Skadi is a barbarian woman who is on a quest to eat every variety of meat in the entire world, and that includes fish and insects and intelligent fantasy races, but not humans. She believes that once she does so, she will grow a magnificent beard, which is something her culture respects. Later on, though, her backstory was more fleshed out. Pun intended. Skadi was tricked by her evil sisters into biting her father, and since cannibalism is an unforgivable sin according to her religion, she was banished from her village and told she could only return once she completed the meat quest. Accompanying her on this quest is Diseaseoid, a bush beast so covered in disease and vermin that anyone other than Skadi who comes in direct contact with him immediately becomes sick and often dies. Skadi killed and ate his parents and treats him like a slave, but he still sticks with her, mostly because his alternative is to die alone in the wilderness or be killed by villagers who don't want to catch the plague. Most of Skadi's adventures are single-page gags and references to the most recent holiday, but every once in a while she goes through a short storyline in which she encounters recurring characters like her rival, Princess Boudica, her manipulative enemy, Nit, and her deadbeat god, Thork. Then, the last year or so of the comic is one long storyline that brings back most of the characters and has Skadi complete her meat quest and ascend to godhood as her reward. So if I'm being completely honest, I'm not a big fan of most of the comic's run. The humor is largely sophomoric and edgy for the sake of being edgy. A lot of the punchlines involve unnecessary violence, wardrobe malfunctions, or simple sight gags. I get the sense that Rice was blowing off steam from her day job by making jokes and illustrations that she could never get away with in a children's cartoon. However, during the last few years of the comic's run, Skadi started to include things like continuity, characters with actual depth, and stories that are more than just setups for a joke. According to a behind-the-scenes post, Rice says that she slowly grew out of her love of edgy humor and started to include more of herself in her creation. So with all of that in mind, if any of you are interested in reading Skadi for yourself, I would recommend sticking to the storylines, and in particular the last storyline, Promises. But if edgy humor is still your thing, then I suppose you might enjoy the whole run. I should also add that the art style is very solid throughout the comic's run. There's some definite improvement as time goes on, but it's decent when it starts, and it only gets better as time goes by. You can definitely tell that Rice draws cartoons for a living. The analysis. Skadi, at least when it gets around to having a story, is an interesting example of what a female perspective can bring to a largely male-dominated genre. In this case, the sword and sandals, wandering barbarian subgenre of fantasy. It's not just that the protagonist is a woman, it's that one of her main rivals, Nit, pretends to be Skadi's friend, but only so that she can copy her style and pass it off as her own, all while giving Skadi a bunch of backhanded, passive-aggressive compliments. That's generally not a relationship men have with one another, or that women have with men, and so its inclusion in this sort of setting is very unusual. There's also a certain amount of misogyny inherent to Skadi's culture and religion. Skadi wants to eat every kind of meat because supposedly she will then grow a beard, and she wants a beard not because she wants to be a man, but because her culture values beards, and normally the only way to get one is to be a man. Meanwhile, her god has a fine and full beard, but is a worthless loser, who doesn't deserve even a scrap of the worship and respect he gets from his people, He also doesn't acknowledge or recognize Skadi's efforts to please him and complete his quest, even when she's screaming her accomplishments at him and repeatedly punching him in the face. Come to think of it, that's a pretty good metaphor for the glass ceiling. Another aspect of the female perspective is the way Skadi worries about her body image. While she dresses in a very skimpy outfit, inspired by 1980s fantasy cover art, she also happens to be 6 feet 4 inches tall and weigh over 200 pounds. Most of that is muscle, obviously, and she puts that muscle to good use, but every now and then she worries about her attractiveness and gets jealous of women whose bodies more closely match the traditional standard of beauty. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.